I have proclaimed martial law in accordance with the powers vested in the President by the Constitution of the Philippines.
This is Ferdinand E. Marcos. He declares martial law on September 21, 1972, before the close of his second term as president from 1969 to 1973, under the 1935 Philippine Constitution, until his downfall in the aftermath of the February 1986 EDSA People Power Revolution, now referred to as EDSA I. Marcos described his rule as constitutional authoritarianism, while critics and oppositionists dubbed his rule as a dictatorship. He ruled the Philippines by his executive orders and presidential decrees. In 1981, he lifted martial law and proclaimed the new society, but the dynamics of his political rule epitomized not only a dominant executive, but a dictator who encroached on democratic institutions, the legislature, judiciary, bureaucracy, military, and on who caused the plunder of the economy disguised in the rhetoric of development. Marcos' dictatorship spawned the counterforces that disposed him from power. The 1986 People Power Revolution ended the Marcos period and started the process of democratic restoration in the Philippines, with a new constitution drafted in 1986 and ratified in 1987. Ferdinand Marcos' parents hailed from Ilocos Norte. His mother, Josefa Edralin, was born to a wealthy land-owning family in Sarat and was a teacher by profession. His father, Mariano Marcos, from Batak, is known to have come from an intelligent and educated family of modest means. Himself a teacher, lawyer, and an eloquent politician, having been elected representative of Ilocos Norte's 2nd District. The young Ferdinand was charged with the murder of his father's political opponent, but while on bail and the trial delayed, he finished law and topped the bar examination. He was allowed to plead his own case before the Supreme Court, a first in the history of Philippine jurisprudence, and succeeded in obtaining acquittal, reversing the decision of the lower court. Marcos's political career began when he became technical assistant to President Manuel Rojas and member of the Philippine Veterans Commission. He went on to become Ilocos Norte's representative to the House of Representatives in 1949 and re-elected in 1953. Under the Liberal Party, Marcos topped the senatorial elections in 1959 and distinguished himself. Then he became Senate President while Macapagal was President. However, Marcos jumped to the Nacionalista Party when it became certain that the Liberal Party would support Macapagal's re-election bid. In the drama of obtaining Marcos's nomination as Nacionalista presidential candidate and in the intense campaign, his wife, Imelda, proved to be an effective, charming, and convincing campaigner and vote-getter for her husband. Marcos's marriage to Imelda Romualdez Marcos, at the time he was congressman in 1954, was politically opportune in his climb to the presidency. Imelda convinced Fernando Lopez of the influential Lopez clan and the owner of the media network to become Marcos's running mate for vice president. The team was re-elected for a second term in 1969, and Marcos achieved a feat no other president had done before, but reportedly by irregular means to secure his victory. The Marcos rule spanned the years from his first term of 4 years starting from 1965 to 1969, the second term from 1969 to his declaration of martial law in 1972, and the dictatorship from 1972 to its downfall in 1986. The 14 years of martial law and authoritarian regime that Marcos called constitutional authoritarianism had also been referred to as conjugal dictatorship. "This nation can be great again," was Marcos's bold statement at his first inaugural address, and was the theme of the political promises that boosted his electoral victory for his first presidential term in 1965. In the first term, he launched programs for agricultural productivity, such as the Green Revolution, research and utilization of rice high-yielding varieties, infrastructure programs, construction of school buildings, road networks, and bridges interconnecting the different parts of the country. Also, Barrio programs for community development. In foreign relations, he hosted the Manila Summit Conference with heads of various nations that form the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization or SHATO, secured increased economic and financial assistance from the U.S., and shortened the military bases agreement from 99 to 25 years. By the second term, Philippine politics had become intense. Student activism was on the rise, and the demonstration of Malacanang on January 30, 1970 and at Congress on February 3, 1970 caused the Senate to create an investigating committee. The core issues identified by the Senate committee and decried by mobilized groups of peasants, workers, teachers, and jeepney drivers, among others, included the economic crisis, unemployment, devaluation, government extravagance, and high prices of commodities. There was opposition to Marcos's government policies, to graft and corruption in government. There was ideological ferment evidenced by the rise of left-leaning groups and communist insurgency that called attention to feudalism, imperialism, and bureaucrat capitalism. There were reported killings, bombings, breakdown of law and order, and warriorism of politicians in different parts of the country. The August 21, 1971 bombing at the Liberal Party proclamation rally held in Plaza Miranda, causing death and injury, had shaken the nation, and the victory of opposition candidates in the 1971 elections signaled the challenge to Marcos. Marcos said he muled over martial law, and there was some public anticipation of it. Invoking the 1935 Constitution's provisions on martial law, Article 6, Section 10, Marcos finally signed Proclamation 1081 on September 21, 1972, but which was publicly announced and executed on September 22, 1972. He called
Marcos, President of the Philippines, by virtue of the powers vested upon me by Article 7, Section 10, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution, do hereby suspend the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus.
The new society, Marcos had suspended the privilege of the work of habeas corpus at the time of writing Today's Revolution, Democracy, and proclaimed martial law a year before in notes on the new society of the Philippines. In his writings, Marcos offered his perceptions and analysis of the Philippine political situations that propelled him to declare martial law and to rule in what he called the new society. Marcos had suspended the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus at the time of writing Today's Revolution, Democracy, and proclaimed martial law a year before in notes on the new society of the Philippines. In Today's Revolution, Democracy, Marcos proposed a revolution from the center to confront the problems of the country, proceeding from his exposition on the concepts of democracy and revolution and warning about the dangers of the Jacobin Revolution and the Communist Revolution. In notes on the new society of the Philippines, Marcos disclosed the compelling reasons for his proclamation of martial law on September 21, 1972. He argued the upsurge of communist rebellion against the Republic, starting as far back as the 1950s, when then-President Quirino suspended the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus, and continuing till his term from both the traditional group and Maoist factions. Marcos rationalized that given these dangers from communism, the liberal approach to rebellion had become imprudent. To convey the sense of urgency and inevitability of proclaiming martial law, Marcos writes, So, on the long night of Sunday, 17 September 1972, it became quite clear to me that the rightist conspiracy and the communist rebellion had almost succeeded in rendering the government impotent to meet any crisis. That, in fact, this unholy combination, if given just the shortest time, would pronounce the death sentence on the Republic. In his rhetoric, martial law and the new society would target the major threats to the Republic, namely communist revolutionaries, rightist conspiracy, Muslim succession, private armies and political warlords, rampant corruption, criminal elements, oligarchy, social injustice, foreign intervention. Proclamation 1081 of September 21, 1972, declaring martial law contained detailed accounts of violence and terrorism, specifically the bombings in various sites by communist groups, and a list of their front organizations among the youth, the peasantry, and the workers. The overall situation rendered justification for martial law on the basis of the executive powers vested on the President by the 1935 Philippine Constitution, Article 7, Section 10, and Paragraph 2. Invoking executive powers and martial law and military authority as Commander-in-Chief, Marcos declared in Proclamation 1081 his command for the armed forces of the Philippines to maintain law and order throughout the Philippines, prevent or suppress all forms of lawless violence as well as any act of insurrection or rebellion, and to enforce obedience to all the laws and decrees, orders, and regulations promulgated by me personally or upon my direction. In ideological rhetoric, Marcos promised to save the Republic, restore peace and order by military means, and establish a new society anchored on social transformation, equality, and democratic participation to prevent the rebellion of the poor. But this could not convince those who saw it as his personal master plan to perpetuate himself in power.
Please allow me to give the interpretation of Marcos' Declaration of Martial Law. So the Declaration of Martial Law by Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines in 1972 was a significant event in the country's history. Marcos claimed that he imposed martial law to suppress communist insurgency and maintain law and order. However, it effectively gave him dictatorial powers, allowing him to rule by decree, dissolve the existing constitution, suppress political opposition, and control the media. Many view Marcos' declaration of martial law as a strategic move to consolidate his power and extend his presidency beyond during his martial law regime. There were widespread human rights abuses, including extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and torture. So the economy also suffered, and the country accumulated a substantial amount of debt due to mismanagement and corruption. In summary, Marcos' declaration of martial law is often interpreted as a means to concentrate power, suppress opposition, and extend his rule, leading to a period of authoritarianism, human rights violations, and economic challenges in the Philippines. Next topic is the 1973 Philippine Constitution in 1976-1981 amendments. The 1973 Philippine Constitution was the fundamental law of the Philippines during the martial law era under President Ferdinand Marcos. It replaced the 1935 Constitution and was formally adopted on January 17, 1973. So this constitution established a parliamentary government, shifting from the previous presidential system under this document. Marcos became the first president of the new Republic of the Philippines under the new political setup. In 1976, the Constitution was amended to formalize the organization of barangays, or the smallest administrative division in the Philippines, and to create the Metropolitan Manila Commission, which later became the Metropolitan Manila Development Authority, or the MMDA. These changes was part of Marcos' efforts to restructure local governance and improve administrative efficiency. So in 1981, another set of amendments was made to the 1973 Constitution. These amendments lifted the restrictions on the re-election of the Philippines, of the president, allowing Marcos to stay in power beyond the two-term limit. This move was highly controversial and contributed to the consolidation of Marcos' authoritarian rule. To sum up everything, it's important to note that these amendments and the entire 1973 Constitution were eventually nullified after the People Power Revolution in 1986, which led to the ousting of Marcos from power and the restoration of democracy in the Philippines. The country reverted to the 1987 Constitution, which is the current Constitution of the Philippines, of my knowledge, cut off in September 2021. The next topic is the liberal democracy versus constitutional authoritarianism. Liberal democracy and constitutional authoritarianism represent two distinct forms of government. Liberal democracy is a political system that combines the principles of representative democracy with the protection of individual liberties and human rights. In liberal democracies, citizens have the right to vote, or we called it as the suffrage in 1987 Philippine Constitution, impress their opinions, and participate in decision-making processes. There are checks and balances in place to prevent the concentration of power, and there is a respect for the rule of law. Liberal democracies prioritize the protection of civil liberties such as freedom of speech, press, and assembly. On the other hand, constitutional authoritarianism refers to a political system where there is a constitution in place, but the government exercises influence to ensure the approval of the new constitution in a questionable referendum in 1973. So the interference undermined the democratic principles of a constitution-making process, as it lacked genuine public participation and was heavily influenced by the authoritarian regime. So the resulting 1973 constitution allowed Marcos to remain in power for an extended period.
Rich referendums, sham elections, and dominated legislator. On November 30, 1972, Marcos called for a plebiscite after the Constitutional Convention had approved 1972 Constitution. So, Marcos wants to inform the citizen and prepare the citizen concerning the new Constitution. So, Marcos wants to continue beyond his term. That is why he organized the barangays and called for a ratification of the Constitution in order to discourage the rebels from setting up a shadow in the government, particularly in the area of Mindanao, in order also to save the republic. So, what Marcos did is that he used the referendum as mechanism to demonstrate the people's support for his move. Referendum is a people's consent without election. Marcos' referendum got a 91% affirmative vote of the people, in which that the vote favored his continuity or para makapadayon si Marcos beyond 1973 to accomplish the reform under the new constitution or a new society. However, a contrary account unveiled the Ridge referendum in which Marcos sought to obtain legitimacy by people's consent. So there are a lot of critics or ni kontra sa referendums. So para ni Filemon Rodriguez, ang referendum was a pony para to give a semblance of ratification. So to prevent Congress from meeting in January 1973 o para pod makancel ang election sa November 1973 and also para ma-perpetuate or masugdan ang martial law. So furthermore, issues arose against the process about who and how many attended, what's the method, how the counting was done. So the referendum legitimacy was questioned. That's para makita ni Marcos nga nang gipilig hapon siya sa tao as of their president is that Marcos conduct first election in 1978. So kanapod nga time pod as preparation for the election, Marcos formed a party which is namely Kilusan ng Bagong Lipunan or KBL. Majority seat is won by this political party created by Marcos kontra sa other political parties. Apoy political party nga nakalaban kining KBL, which is Lakas ng Bayan or Laban, and the Liberal Party. The critics said that the election conducted by allowed by Marcos in 1978 is a fraudulent election. Marcos had a Laban leaders arrested. So katong mga Lakas ng Bayan or Laban party is that gipaaresto ni Marcos. Mauni siya si Senator Stock Rodrigo, Teofesto Gingina, and Aquiliano Pimentel. So, on January 17, 1981, Marcos signed Proclamation 2045 para i-lift ang martial law. Based on the ratification of the amendments, Marcos allowed election to be held. So naana po ratification sa Constitution wherein di-allow na po ni Marcos ang election wherein nadaog gihapon siya under the kilusan ng Bagong Lipunan or KBL. Naana po nag-ingon nga the election were interpreted to attempt to further legitimize his rule. However, this was apparently an election for show na lang ni siya nga election. Wherein sa katong 1981 nga election, Marcos got 88% of the vote against rival candidates Alejo Santos of the Nacionalista Party and Bartolome Cabangbang of the Federal Party who ran as a token opposition. So, paghuman ni Marcos sa iyang 6th term from the 1981 election, di ba, 6th term, man sa iyang 6th term, is that Gi-announce niya nga na-end na ang New Society or 1973 Constitution ug he said to be replaced by the new republic, the fourth republic in the Philippine political history. Batasang pambansa was generally perceived as a rubber stamp for Marcos because of the unquestioning support given to him by majority of the KBL party members. Furthermore, he ensured that his power to issue decrees, general orders, and proclamation had the force of law. So, mauto siya ang nahitabo ang naay ginaingon nila nga shams election, rage referendums.
So let's tackle about the executive relation between the late Marcos administration and the judiciary. So during the time Supreme Court considered as highly politicized, there is a presidential interference. So during also the time the Supreme Court also dismissed a lot of cases, especially those who are contradict to the Marcos regime. So one of these cases is the referendum on the ratification of 1973 Constitution by this is the case of Habiliana versus Executive Secretary. So Chief Justice Roberto Concepcion dismissed this case because he said that because we all know that the Supreme Court is politicized and most of the member of the Supreme Court is really supporting the Marcos regime. And another case is the suspension of writ of habeas corpus. So habeas corpus, this is the constitutional rights granted by to the potential offenders or potential law offenders, especially and this case is Lansang versus Garcia. So during the time of President Marcos is that there's a lot of appeals by the oppositions or a case, especially those who contradict to the Marcos regime, was really dismissed. And Marcos highlight the decision of Chief Justice Roberto Concepcion that it was that the voice of the majority has spoke up. The newly formed constitution has its full blast or taking it into full effects. Overall conclusion, the relationship between the judiciary and the Marcos administration senior is that Supreme Court is not independent. It was highly politicized, and there is a presidential interference, and the Supreme Court autonomy is violated. Let's go to tackle the relations of military and the Marcos administration during the martial law or during the Marcos regime. So of course the military helps the formation of Marcos regime, and there is what we call a military supremacy over civilian, and a military was used to manage political and administrative matters. So under the 1973 Constitution, a military was used to the implementation of the martial law, and another is that they are also administer the development programs such as relief operation, and they are also the one who are in charge to monitor the election. So there has been a lot of accusation during military accusation during the time of Marcos regime. They labeled the military as lack of discipline. They are violating the laws, and they are maltreating the and torture the prisoners. And there has been what we call a human rights violation and arbitrary killing. The military bureaucracy during Marcos has really this what we call a very negative view. The military during Marcos is deprofessionalized, deinstitutionalized, and highly politicized, and they are really supporting the Marcos regime personal interests, and they are not really on public service. So after all those negativity about the military of Marcos administration is that there natagitawag nga naay po'y mga military nga nag-alsa laban sa Marcos. So let's going to find out the factors nga nung nag-alsa ni mga military sa Marcos administration. First is what we are calling the disenchantment towards Marcos, or mga hatred hinanakit sa Marcos administration. And ang other fold ng militar is tinawagan og reform of armed forces of the Philippine movement, and there is what we call a failed coup against Marcos, o katong mga middle and lower level military is nag-alsa laban ka Marcos, and all those all those pag-alsa sa mga military to Marcos administration is they are triggering the EDSA 1. So EDSA 1 is the reason nga nung the Marcos regime was na down or na end. Let's going to know what are the Marcos relation with the bureaucracy. When we are talking about the bureaucracy, this is the non-elected official hierarchy order. It was stated in the document that it was politicized and they are in charge in the implementing of development plan, programs, project of Marcos administration. And during kini pod nga time is that Marcos administration reorganized the bureaucracy with the presidential decree number 1 wherein namugna ang integrated reorganization plan. O naapod presidential decree number 6 wherein there is a dismissal of government employees lalo na kanang nagkasala, and dapat sa kuan pod kanang nisuporta pud ka sa KBL or you are not against with the KBL, which is the party that has been formed by the President Marcos. And there is also the appointment of military personnel in the government agency, although kabalo naman ta nga even though it was administrative body ang bureaucracy is that naay appoint ng mga military officials. The Marcos bureaucracy was also accused of mishandling. So, due to the mishandling, it resulted into the foreign debts or debts sa Pilipinas or utang, and corruption na apoy ginatawag og cronyism and failure development plan. So all this Marcos relation with the bureaucracy, it means that dapat ang bureaucracy is that kanang musuporta jud siya sa mga program ni Marcos, and even if ginabantayan jud na ang bureaucracy sa government ni Marcos. So let's tackle the two topics, which is the end of Marcos regime due to the discontent and the opposition of Ferdinand Imelda, which is Imelda is the wife of late Ferdinand Marcos Sr. And we're going also to tackle the path to downfall. So the reason of the discontent is there is what we call as third discontent sa pamumuno ni Marcos. Og naapoy mga rally kanang naapoy mga opposition nga nag-mobilized against Marcos. So of course sa Marcos during the time ni Marcos is that we all know nga that there is a military supremacy or dapat mosunod jud ka sa balaod sa gobyerno. So mao ni siya ang mga specific reasons of the discontent sa mga taong bayan kang Marcos. So of course we're going to tackle first the political opposition. So katong mga political issue sa kanang Marcos, katong mga victory niya sa mga shams election, o the other people also question the illegitimacy kay we all know nga naay referendum ra ang iyahang kuan man sa referendum ka declare na dayon siya og martial law o nya illegal pod ang iyahang o nya ang democracy pod iyahang gipulihan og authoritarianism og Marcos was labeled as dictator. It means people don't have a participative sa government kay authoritarian man, and the reason for the public discontents sa Marcos administration is ang human rights violation, corruption, ug napoy ang wala na resolba nga pagkamatay sa political opposition nga si Benigno Aquino. So naapod gitawag nga political repression wherein ang media gipasira ni late Ferdinand Marcos ug ang dili maka-join ang public opinion sa government kay because authoritarian, of course isa ran jud ang mag-decide ana, and what we call mga opposition. So naapod ang steered discontent sa public or dahilan sa pag-discontent kanang wala kauyon ang public is because to the Marcos wealth, unquestionable Marcos wealth, og ginatawag ko kini nila nga plunders economy, or that they are accusing Marcos of robbing the economy. So another discontent nga dahilan nga nung kanang naay kasuko ang public or wala nakauyon ang public is because sa kang Imelda, mo ni extravagance of power ni Imelda, o tungod aning mga discontent or tungod sa mga issue during sa Marcos administration, especially ang martial law, pagpanatili ni Marcos sa pila ka tuig sa servisyo is that na kanang ang public na discontent kay dako kayo ang foreign debt o ang failure sa mga development program. Next, let's proceed the path to downfall. So ang una jung dahilan nga nung na-down ang Marcos administration is because ang assassination jud ni Ninoy Aquino in 1983. So and ang presidential snap election, which is wherein nga ang gihalal automatic na gihalal dayon si Corazon Aquino sa katong snap election sa mga tawo, wherein wala pud niagi utro og election o gipaagi lang po sa people powers. And another one is ang mga military mismo, personnel sa mga military opposition po sa against Marcos. So mao ni siya ang mga katong giuna ko nga RAM, mao na siya ang mga military officer who wants a reform, or there is a reform movement of the military officers. So all those discontent and opposition against Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos was resulted to the People Power 1 in 1986. So there are a lot of various sectors joined to oust Marcos administration. Kabalo na tani mga professional, mga church, business sectors, mga militanteng grupo, and of course gipangunahan niya siya sa mga opposition ug daghan pa. So and after all, paghuman sa people power is that ang usa po sa dahilan is that nanumpa na si ang byuda Binik ni Aquino nga si Corazon Aquino sa office. True ra pud na siya sa kanang gipili ra pud na siya sa tao without election. And the next is 1989 is that mao pud na ang the end is ang pagkamatay jud ni Marcos katong 1989